We've asked Evelyn to give this talk because she's been involved in the twinning almost since its beginning. She went on her very first exchange way back in 1951 and got completely hooked on the whole idea of twinning, I believe. She's going to explain how it was all set up, the origins of the twinning, and how it developed with the school exchanges, all the different club exchanges that went on. And then I hope how the Twinning Association came into being, because that's kind of a separate thing, really. She has been such a driving force for the success of the twinning that Orléans made her a citoyen d'honneur, or an honorary citizen, a few years ago. And I think 2 years ago, she made the keynote speech at the Joan of Arc celebrations. 2 years ago, yes.
Yes.
And I think that's quite a prestigious thing to be asked to do, because the last year that I was there, Emmanuel Macron made the keynote speech. So she's in very good company. Right. So we'll just hand over to Evelyn. Oh, if anybody wants to ask a question, you can do it by try and remember till the end. Or
Sally, can I interrupt, Sally, just to say, not necessarily, if what I'm saying isn't clear, people can interrupt and just ask me. Well, I don't mind.
Wave a hand or something.
Yeah.
If you want something, if you want to unmute quickly and easily, you just press your space bar. Okay, right. So hand over to Evelyn and hear what you've got to say.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Sally, and good evening, everyone. And this is it's actually talking about privilege that I had 2 years ago doing the address. I felt less nervous then than I do now, because I'm quite sure that there are a lot of people sitting here in front of me who know, you certainly, Sally, know Orléans as well as I do. And maybe not quite such a long association, but it's a funny place, Orléans. It gets round the heart. It really does. I fell in love with it way back in 1951, and it honestly has never spoiled my love for it as a city, and the people. The people are very special and they're lovely. The Dundee's association with Orléans goes back to wartime. The Franco-Scottish Society in 1944 decided that as towns were being liberated after D-Day, the liberation of towns, that these towns were mostly in a very, very seriously bombed out situation. For instance, Edinburgh was invited to adopt Caen, which was practically razed to the ground. It was in a dreadful state. By August of that year, the Americans had swept through down the Loire Valley, doing the pincer movement to Paris, and Dundee was asked if it would adopt Orléans, and it did. And they apparently, at that point, Dundee was always known for its heavy linen goods and its making of sails for sailing ships, and the French was coming to the Bâche covers, for waterproof covers for roofs and that sort of tarpaulin. That was the word I was looking for. It was famous for the manufacture of tarpaulins. And in 1945, the then Lord Provost, Sir Garnet Wilson, he was invited to go to Orléans to be thanked for Orléans, Dundee's gift to Orléans. All sorts of research has been done on this. It is believed that Dundee did send out tarpaulins to cover roofs of buildings that would still be occupied, still be lived in, but were roofless because of the bombardments and so on at the moment of liberation. And they had Lord Provost Garnet Wilson was invited to come to Orléans to be thanked. No amount of research has revealed how they got tarpaulins out there, if in fact I was told in Orleans that the tarpaulins had come, that they had the tarpaulins, but there's no reference to this that I could find in the Chamber of Commerce annals, their minutes and of that era, and the same in city chambers. There is nothing to indicate this at all, and it makes me wonder if the war was still going on when this transporting of tarpaulins apparently had happened. Not just tarpaulins, needles and thread and bits of cloth for housewives, which I always thought was rather nice. Hussives, they called them. And Dundee women were asked to make these, apparently, to make these little bundles of thread and needles. And they went out at that at the same time as the tarpaulins. I do wish somebody would find someday the actual story of who organised that. There was a Colonel Hill who was chair of the Chamber of Commerce at that time, and it could well be that he was involved in some way. But as I say, all the research that I've done and Ian Flett did, we just could not find any basis in writing or in minutes of this particular event. However, Garnet Wilson was obviously invited to be thanked for something, because the invitation was really, he was very disappointed. He was actually put out of office by the time that invitation could be accepted, which was in May 1946. But he went. He was the one who went. The next Lord Provost had said to him, Mr. Powrie said that he should go because he had been instrumental in organising this friendship with Orleans. Well, in fact, it was the Franco-Scottish Society that set up the twinning with Orleans. And there's a very nice letter that exists. I have a copy of it here, and it's from Dr. Chevalier, Pierre Chevalier, who was the mayor of Orleans at the time, and he writes to Garnet Wilson thanking him for his letter of the 30th of October, which informs him that the city of Dundee is keen to establish friendly relations with the city of Orleans. And that really, as far as I know, is the first indication of the Dundee's acceptance of the proposal that they adopt a city, and they adopted Orleans. And what Dr. Chevalier does in this letter, he lists the possibility for exchanges, that there should be in Orleans, they have a society, an archaeological society, an art college, a music conservatoire, and then they've got lycées and colleges and chambers of commerce. And there are also the possibility of all sorts of groups and associations who would be capable of twinning, of coming together. And that letter was written on the 9th of November, 45. Now, Garnet Wilson, by the time this came, was out of office, but he did agree that he would go. And if you think about this, that letter came in 1945. The World War was only 2 months finished. We were still very, very severely rationed here, and there was just all sorts of things going on, and which makes the whole idea of bringing these cities together at such a time, I think, is a remarkable tribute to a sense of wanting for any favor. Let's get together, let's make a different world, a world where people talk to each other and a world where people get together. And I may say that we talk about the twinning with Orleans, but our association with Orleans predates the word twinning. It was never called a twinning. It was called all sorts of things, but the twinning was a thing that became the rage in the 60s, not in the 40s. And so Dundee's twinning with Orleans really started off as a friendship and an aid thing. Garnet Wilson did go out in the September of 46 with quite a delegation. And I think the whole idea was that they would go and find the possibility of setting up business exchanges. He wanted to attract business to Dundee, and perhaps there was a way of Dundee doing trade with Orleans. That actually didn't ever happen. But one interesting side line on that was the fact that when Pierre Chevalier and his delegation came to Dundee in May 1947, he was very impressed by the existence of the Kingsway and all the industries, the new industries along the Kingsway, which, of course, Garnet Wilson had a considerable amount of work setting up and persuading the government to give money to attract business to Dundee. And he had Pierre Chevalier saw this, and it's because of that Orleans, an old city, an ancient city, decided that to revive business in post-war years, it was going to be essential to try to set up some kind of structure like the Kingsway development. And that's why there are a whole lot of new industries set up outside Orleans in a set-aside industrial park. And that was as a direct result of what Pierre Chevalier saw when he came to Dundee. It's an interesting thing that really was the only commercial, I would have said, success of the jumelage, the twinning with Orleans. One of the interesting things is that the first correspondences with setting up the meetings, the visits, it was between Dr. R.L. Mackey, who was the lecturer in French and history, I think, in the teacher training college. And he was a fluent French speaker, and he conducted quite a long correspondence and a very interesting correspondence with Mademoiselle Perrat, who was she was helping at the town hall with translation, and she was a teacher in a lycée in Orleans. And Mademoiselle Perrat was on the original list of the visitors to come to Dundee in May 1947, but the French school system being as it was, poor Mademoiselle Perrat, it was sent to a lycée, I think, in Marseille, so she had to withdraw any idea of coming to Dundee, and her place was taken by a man that every Dundonian that ever went to Orleans knew well, and that was Clovis Duvaux. Michel Duvaux was a quite remarkable man, died at the age of 99, lived in the Place de Dundee, of which he was enormously proud, and he brought the first exchange, the first school exchange pupils over in 1947, and was involved almost to his dying day in the exchanges. If your Dundonian went to Orleans, they were invariably met at the town hall by Michel Duvaux, who then gave them a tour of the city. And I'm quite sure that all of you who have been there will remember Michel Duvaux's his historic talks. And he loved Scotland. He loved Dundee. And when he came to Dundee in the days before the road bridge, he would spend a morning just going backwards and forwards on the Fyfie. going backwards and forwards and sitting on the top deck and just watching Dundee approach, and then Dundee vanished. And he told me this, that it was one of the great joys, the thing that he dreamt of when he left, when he went back to Orleans. He used to say, oh, I have to get back to Dundee. I have to go to the sea. Of course, there's no sea anywhere near Orleans. And he was a man from that area. He was born in the Sologne. And he lived in that area all his life. A quite remarkable old gentleman. But and of course we honoured him the same year as Orleans made me an honorary citizen, which was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the jumelage, the twinning, in 1996. And Michel Duvaux had a street named after him, Clovis Duvaux Drive, out towards Invergowrie. And that's and he was desperately proud of that. He really thought this was the most wonderful thing. He had been married, he was widowed, but they had no children, and he was so thrilled by the idea that his name would live on in his beloved Dundee, and that he was thrilled to bits with that. So that was Michel Duvaux, and he, as I say, came and went with the school exchanges for years, and that they affected. We tried to calculate this once. The school exchanges went on till 1995, these regular exchanges. And it's impossible to calculate how many young people were involved over the years, but it does come to thousands, because most years there were more than 50 exchanges, 50 exchangees, and that added up and until you think, goodness me, hundreds and hundreds of people really were involved, both French and Scottish. And there were interesting. I got involved with that when my family were at the stage of wanting to go to France as well, and I would have thought that probably rambling on about France as I do would have put my teenage kids off altogether, but no, they all wanted to go, and they did, and they were. Even they remember Michel Duvaux, and he always made this joke that his first trip to Chambord, he loved taking people to Chambord, to the Château de Chambord, and he said that his first visit to Chambord was in a deux chevaux. And then he would giggle and say, of course, my carriage had two horses, in front. It wasn't a deux chevaux as we know them. He was a very amusing man, and as I say, very much a guiding light in the early days of the school exchanges. The school exchanges, I said, went on until 1995, and where they sadly, and it was sad, the Tayside region had twinned itself with the Charente, and the education department, of course, was based in the region, and they weren't interested at all in fostering the relationship with Orleans. They'd made their own arrangement with Charente, and all the focus was on getting pupils at schools to go to Charente. And the Charente exchanges took off at that point. And for a wee while, it did seem as though the Orleans exchanges, this is from the late 1970s, through the 80s, it was dwindling. There wasn't just quite the same number applying. And then, of course, with the end of regions, the Charente thing faded away, the Charente relationship faded away, and the Orleans exchange began to flourish again, and only came to an end in 1995. It's simply because the Orleans people wanted always it to be 3 weeks in Orleans and 3 weeks here, the exchanges, and they just, because of the very long French summer holidays, they couldn't understand that it was very difficult to get youngsters to commit their entire summer holiday of 6 weeks to an exchange like this. And of course, by that time, families were going abroad for their own holidays. The families were all going together. So instead of having the opportunity of going to a twin city and immersing yourself in a totally different culture and a different language and so on and so forth, you got into dad and mum's car and off you went and camped or lived in hotels and didn't actually have the experience, the cultural experience that the school exchanges gave the youngsters. However, in I think it was 1990, my husband decided that something had to be done about encouraging young people to exchange and to learn about each other's cities. And he set up the Dundee Orleans Project Trust. And the trust was it was actually very, very nicely financed by British Airways for a number of years. It offered a prize, 2 prizes, to 2 youngsters in Orleans. The price of a holiday in Dundee, living with a family in Dundee, and that they had to do they were given a subject, and they had to interpret that subject as the one usually about Scotland, something about Dundee and something about Orleans. And some of the entries were absolutely fascinating. A lot of research work, done, an awful lot of research work done perhaps in schools. There was quite an interest in Orleans in taking part in this. And we had some super exchanges, and very, very nicely, a lot of people in Dundee volunteered to be host families for these youngsters. It was good. It was something. It didn't last terribly long. I think it was about 10 years that we had the Project Trust, but it was good. And one of the reasons why it didn't continue was just an inability. We couldn't get another sponsor. British Airways withdrew all their sponsorships at one point. All their sponsorship. They weren't sponsoring anything in Britain at all. And unfortunately, the jumelage lost its chief sponsor at that point, and it just wasn't possible to carry on. There we are. That was the twinning. One of the first things that happened, and I'll go back a little bit to the visit, the Orleans people lined the streets to greet Garnet Wilson and the Dundee delegation, which was headed up by Piper Smith, the town piper, who paraded them off the train and through the streets of Orleans, where apparently thousands, and there are photographs, thousands of people turned out to greet Garnet Wilson and his delegation. And there he was in September 46, dressed in his robes, the Lord Provost robes, complete with that wonderful chain and so on and so forth. And they paraded through the streets, and they had the most wonderful time. They were greeted everywhere like royalty. I mean, it was just absolutely extraordinary, the welcome that they got when they were there. And they were, Garnet Wilson himself, in fact, wrote, if I can find it, I thought I had brought it. Yes, he did. He wrote about this in his book. I don't know if any of you have seen a copy of this, but it's called The Making of a Lord Provost. And it's all about Garnet Wilson of G.L. Wilson's. And there's a little bit, a chapter about his visit to Orleans. I'll read you a little bit of it. With the end of the war in Europe, links were being forged between Scottish and French cities. The old alliance had come again in a new guise. Dundee and Orleans were joined in this civic intermarriage. I think that's lovely. To seal the union, a deputation went out in September 1946 to this historic French city to be entertained with warm hospitality by city and church. Piper Smith was with us to make the welkin ring. Returning from dinner at the Bishop's Palace, the skill of the pipes was heard at midnight in the narrow cobbled streets of Orleans, and from bed erupted the children to cheer our passing. In leisure moments, a collector of the earliest examples of printed books in Cnabula, Dr. Pierre Chevalier, Mayor of Orleans and Member of Parliament and hero of the resistance, was already a leading figure in French politics. Fervent of spirit, well versed in affairs political, he was even then urging the formation of a Western European bloc that need not lean on the United States. The theme was uppermost in his mind when a return visit was paid to Dundee, and he missed no chance to win converts to the cause. Madame Chevalier came with her husband to Dundee. At home, she had no part to play in her husband's public life, and to all seeming that was taboo. Our present to her was a garnet brooch, and she wore it with great pride. Its colour may have been ominous, good fortune absent. Until Pierre Chevalier's task of seeing Orleans rebuilt after the ravages of war was in sight of completion, he had declined to accept cabinet rank. But the time came when the way was open to him to accept this, and tragedy and promotion fell on the same day. At noon, a cabinet minister, this was in 1951, by the way, in the evening, was shot dead by his wife. The French have a word for it, crime passionnel. The fury of the Orleanese was so great that the trial was moved from Orleans to Reims, and banishment overseas followed acquittal. A tragic end to a really quite remarkable man. And that, strangely enough, when I came upon that, I realized that the 1951, which is when this happened, I was in the exchange. I was on the pupil exchange, and Pierre Chevalier, at a reception in the town hall, addressed us and spoke to us and spoke about his liking for Dundee and the Scots, and how he was a wonderful man. He was a very, very dynamic chap, and we had just come back to Scotland, the exchange with the French chums, when it was headline news on the BBC that the mayor of Orleans had been shot. And the girl that was with my exchange, Alice, when she realized, told her what had happened, she was quite convinced that he had been trapped by the communists for some reason. Anyway, I can remember my father saying to her, no, he was shot by his wife. Well, perhaps his wife was a communist, she said. So she was quite determined she was going to blame the communists for Pierre Chevalier's death. But he was one of these people who helped to cement the thing. When Madame Chevalier came to Dundee, she really did make herself very unpopular in that she demanded bread with every meal, and which was perfectly understandable in a Frenchwoman, except that she seemed to not to accept that bread was rationed, as it was when they came. And it ended up with everybody in the Dundee Orleans Association at that time that were entertaining the Chevaliers. If you had a plate of soup in a restaurant, you got half a slice of bread. So everybody just handed their bread over to Madame Chevalier, and she thought this was wonderful, which of course she did. But she didn't realize that there was a sacrifice involved in that, which was it didn't endear her entirely to the host families here. But there we are. We went on from there to the first Lord Provost, who was invited to the Joan of Arc festivities, apart from Garnet Wilson, who couldn't go in 46, was in fact Alexander Powrie in 1949. And that started the annual invitation to the Lord Provost of Dundee and a delegation from Dundee to take part in be part of the Joan of Arc celebrations. And this was an acknowledgement of the Scots part, the Scottish Army's part, the official army. They weren't mercenaries, who were sent out to help with the relief of Orleans in 1429. And that particular event in Orleans the year after 1430, Joan of Arc was already a prisoner in Rouen. And it was the Bishop of Orleans at that time who decided that there should be a défilé, a parade through the city. He had persuaded Joan to parade through Orleans when it was relieved, to be thanked by the people. On her horse, she went up and down all the streets, and the crowds came out and cheered her. And he thought this was a good way of commemorating the relief of Orleans, was to have a parade every year. Well, that parade still goes on. There have been very, very few instances of it being not taking place. I think twice during the French Revolution, once during, or maybe twice during the war, the Second World War, and sadly, this last year. And it looks as though it's definitely not going to happen this year either, which is a great shame, because it is possibly one of the oldest continuing ceremonies and parades in history, in European history, in any event. And if you get a chance to be in Orleans for the Joan of Arc festivities, I'm sure those of you who have been there for the activity, the festivities, it's wonderful. It's absolutely amazing. It's superb. But I think, apart from just hoping that the association, I wish it very, very well indeed, that the association can keep this friendship going despite all the current difficulties of travel and what have you, that amitié will continue, and that the warmth of the welcome here will continue to be reciprocated in Orleans. And I'll be delighted to answer questions.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Can I just ask, who actually set up the twinning associations? Well, just because the exchanges weren't continuing anymore.
No,
Angus set up the project, the Dundee Orleans project.
It was Lord Provost MacDonald, Tom MacDonald. So you see, the problem with the exchanges were based on the fact that Orleans, and still doesn't have a twinning association of any kind. Everything goes through the town hall. So there was a strange sort of imbalance going on, and Tom MacDonald and his wife came to two of the Joan of Arc. Well, they accepted the invitation twice, and it was on the second one that I was there, and he said to me, what can we do about this? We really have got to make sure that this goes on. And he was very, very enthusiastic about continuing the twinning, and we chatted about it for quite a wee while, and he said, of course, the other thing is we have the two other associations, or three in fact. We have the twinning with
Würzburg, Alexandria.
And Alexandria, well, I was coming to Alexandria, and Zadar in Croatia.
Zadar, yeah.
And so he did actually set up the associations, Tom MacDonald, and I think it was either 1989 or 1990 that these associations were set up. And at that point, Angus decided that there really was little point in continuing with the jumelage, which the Project Trust kind of attached itself to the actual association, the twinning association, and it just petered out. It simply because I don't think anybody had appreciated how much work was involved actually in organising it, and so it just didn't last very long.
I can say, Evelyn, Tom MacDonald was a great instigator, you said, he came to Würzburg when I went across there the first time when we were at 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a great, as you say, great supporter of all the twinning associations.
Tremendous,
He was the one that drove the thing, as you say. All these 4 associations, twinning associations, started under his watch. I'm very sorry that poor man, he died very early. But he was actually a great ambassador for us,
he certainly
Dundee
was.
abroad.
Yes, I would agree with you, Alistair. I think he really was, and I think that was manifested at his funeral, because Orleans sent a deputy mayor for Tom MacDonald's funeral in St Andrew's Cathedral, and I think Alexandria had a representative there, maybe from the consulate, I don't know, but and Würzburg did. You know, so it really was testimony to how effective he had been and supportive that he had been of twinning. He was a great friend of the twinning associations.
I'd also like to say, Evelyn, that in the Orleans connection, of course, the Rotary Club of Dundee and Orleans, the Rotary Club of Orleans, are still very, very close.
But Alistair, you remind me that I forgot to mention the Rotary. That started in 1946. It's as old as the twinning. The Rotary, the first exchanges, apart from the council representation, the Garnet Wilson's people, I think he had the I would have to check on this, but I think he had the current president of the Rotary on that delegation. And so
I wouldn't be surprised, Evelyn. I don't know exactly the details, but certainly I've been involved with Rotary 30 odd years. We've had a number of delegations from the Rotary Club of Orleans across here. In fact, probably the strongest link, I would say. And I'm still in regular touch with a number of them. Obviously at the moment in email and Zoom, but I've been myself and Vivian. We've been across a number of times to Orleans. So it's one of the strongest connections, which is lovely to see, and hopefully will continue for many years.
Very good. It's been a very important link with the Rotaries.
Odile.
I'd like to know if Madame Chevalier went to prison. I mean, she doesn't sound a very nice person. Anyway,
she actually she was. They decided that she'd gone a bit potty.
Yeah.
And she was actually put into a nursing home in Brittany. And it was pretty well exiled. She died, I think, 3 or 4 years later. She didn't outlive him very long. But no, she was confined to this nursing home. It wasn't a prison that she went to. She should have done. Never mind.
She was potty.
Evelyn, was it not the education department that organised all the exchanges in the 60s? Because it seemed like it when we went. I went in 1966 and 1968.
Yes, it was them.
Yeah.
It was the corporation, the Dundee Corporation Education Department. That set it up. I mean, the year I went, it was, and I did. The thing was, I mean, the reason I went, I wasn't at school in Dundee. I was in school in St Andrews, but my school got a call because there were 4 places going and they couldn't get anybody to fill them. And they contacted my school, and I went home, and I, pretty well went on hunger strike until my parents said I could go. I was so determined to go, absolutely determined to go, and had a wonderful time. It was tremendous. And when I think of it, the journey then, in 1951, got onto a train, got to London, an overnight train, but there was no bed, you just sat up, and they got to London, were piled onto a bus and taken across to Victoria Station, and then onto the New Haven boat, the train. I think it was Victoria, down to New Haven, and then Dieppe. And it was D.B. Smith. I don't know if any of you remember D.B. Smith, but he was Donald Smith. He was a teacher of French. Latterly, I think that he was at the Morgan, but latterly he taught in Forfar, I think. And D.B. he was responsible for us all, he and his wife. And our luggage was taken off the ship and left on the quay at Dieppe. And we got to Orleans and we had no cases. We had nothing. And we had, it was for 3 whole days. We were without clean clothes or anything. It was awful. But eventually the cases did arrive. But he'd been so busy, I think, shepherding us youngsters that he forgot about the luggage, and that was that. But anyway, that was fun.
Your journey sounds not much different from mine. In 1966, because we went overnight by train down to London, the bus to Victoria, and then we had a bus all the way down to Limp in Kent, where we got on a teeny wee airplane. And in a teeny little airport where we had to pick up a little cardboard box, which was our lunch, sandwiches and that. And we went bump, bump, bump over the channel. And it really was a little airplane. And then we went from Beauvais by bus all the way to Paris, and then dropped off a few people. And then Orleans. It took 24 hours. We were there in the evening.
Yes, I know. I know, we're all exhausted by the time we got there. Yeah, I once took that lid, but it went to was it Trouville, or I can't remember.
Le Touquet.
Le Touquet. Yes, you're right, Sally.
I've been on it.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't remember where it and got into the Gare Saint-Lazare. I always remember that the train got into Saint-Lazare.
Evelyn, think of Sir Garnet Wilson in 1946. How did they travel from Dundee to Orleans? Must have been a nightmare.
They travelled by train. And they travelled by train, and they travelled. The extraordinary thing is that a member of the council was. His name has just gone, but he owned the La République du Centre, the newspaper. And this newspaper came out in celebrated editions. I think there were 4 in 2 days. And one was the Dundee delegation, the headlines, the Dundee delegation have arrived in Dieppe. And then the Dundee delegation have arrived in Paris. And the Dundee delegation will be here with us tomorrow. And then the Dundee delegation are, on its way. And no wonder that the streets were, thousands of people turned out because of this amazing build-up of the paper. It's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. But as you say, and of course in those days, you couldn't take more than £5 out of the country. £5 literally, and you couldn't take more than half a pound of tea. And I can always remember somebody being absolutely furious. They had taken a pound of tea because they were there with, I think it was a brother and sister, and the mother had got them a pound of tea, but they'd one half to one family and one half to another family. And because they wwere carrying a pound of tea, the customs took the tea off them, and these kids arrived with no gift, no tea. And tea was considered, very, very precious. But no, it was the early days, I think, were, absolutely amazing how that delegation got there and were entertained magnificently when they got to Orleans. They must have wondered, somewhere the menu for a dinner that was laid on by the Chamber of Commerce to the Dundee delegation, and it reads like, it must have been beyond the wildest thoughts and dreams of the Dundee delegation. It's beautiful with all the wines, to go with, and so on and so forth.
Were there many buildings actually standing in Orleans, to accommodate this sort of big dinner?
Well, at that point, no. And at that point, the Place de Martrois, with Joan on her horse in the middle.
Yes.
behind her is the Martroi. It's a restaurant there. Now, it's a magnificent facade. And at the other side is an identical facade, and that's the chamber. That was the old Chamber of Commerce. At the end of 1940, with the middle of 1940, with the bombardment and the fire, because fire swept through the city, they were left with the cafe, the restaurant had gone. It was completely razed to the ground. But the Chamber of Commerce was untouched. It was really the most extraordinary thing. So they had, in fact, the model for rebuilding the thing as it was. And they very, very skillfully rebuilt the city pretty well as it had been. They didn't go for massive, pulling down of buildings. The place was in ruin, but they built it as it had been.
How many years did they take to do that?
They did well. It was all the Rue Royale, the arcaded street that goes down from the Place de Martroi down to the bridge.
Yes.
That was already rebuilt. The arcaded. I mean, there was nothing behind it. The shops, there were little. Well, they were just not really shops. There were little huts and things, but they had rebuilt. They were starting to rebuild the facades. And if you're in Orléans and you look above street level, you can see the 1940s, 50s, almost utility housing, which gradually being replaced. And they've done a remarkable job in rebuilding the old city, which was pretty well destroyed completely. And it's been beautifully, beautifully restored. And that's the current mayor, Serge Grouard, who has been very, very responsible for that. The first mayor to have been elected 4 times in a row. The first mayor of Orléans. He's very, very popular, and wrote a quite remarkable book about. He doesn't actually come from Orléans. He comes from not up near Fontainebleau. Anyway, he always had loved Orléans, and he decided that in his political career he would try to become mayor of Orléans, and he succeeded. And he's very popular, and he's done a tremendous amount of restoration in the old city. It's beautiful.
Sorry, what's his name, Evelyn?
Serge Grouard, and Grouard. And he said to me one day, but I have a Scottish ancestry.
Oh.
And I thought, so you have. Gruer,
yeah. Yep.
So I'm quite sure his ancestors probably came from the top of Glen Isla, where the Gruers come from.
Outside Dundee.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So how do you think we go forward from here? How do you think we manage to keep this twinning association going?
Well, I think, in all honesty, Sally, I don't envy you. What really will be is an uphill struggle now. Well, I mean, the current situation just makes it impossible. But I think, what you were planning for the 75th anniversary, just do your utmost to keep the name Orléans to the forefront so that people do know. I mean, the number of people that I have met in Dundee, I didn't know we were twinned with Orléans. They know about Alexandria, and I think it's a language thing. I honestly do think it's a language thing. That the popularity of the twinning with Alexandria means that there is no difficulty. The only difficulty I imagine, Alistair, with Alexandria is the cost of getting there and getting back again.
But the Würzburg, I must say, the Würzburg connection is very strong, and they're very supportive. Over the years, with John Ledford recently, etc., they came to most things. They were very good.
Yep.
In fact, they were the best and biggest delegation. Alexandria, 1 or 2, Orléans, not many, of nothing sometimes. So it's really, I would say the Würzburg is probably the strongest link to Dundee. And I'm very pleased that our golfing situation, we've had over 25 years of going back and forwards to Würzburg, ever since Rudy May, the mayor of Würzburg, great chap, and he was. It's been a very strong linkage, and they've had musical entertainment. The mayor comes here very regularly. So I would say they're probably the strongest, I think, because they're highly regarded. Dundee's highly regarded in Würzburg. I think the problem with Orléans, when you go across there, there's too many, they've got too many jumelage. You know,
well, they've got the 13 of them.
Yes, the Dundee's not in the sort of on the top 3, where in Würzburg, clearly that way. And Alexandria, when you go into the offices there, I mean, again, the Dundee is thought of as high up in the list as far as their twinning.
Well, Dundee, of course, was the first one with Orléans. Anne, I think you want to ask a question.
Yeah. In Dundee, no wonder people don't know, because in some cities they have notices at the boundaries.
Right.
We are twinned with, but as far as I know, there's none to say that.
There's none. We tried, and Peter and Sally will bear me out on this. We've tried for a long number of years to try to get such a notice outside, and then been told, no, we can't afford to do that. Well, I quite honestly think that there are things that we can do, and we did do for a number of years. The flower show, for instance, the food and flower show, we always had a delegation over from Orléans, and in fact we had entries from the Orléans, their equivalent of the Dundee gardening side, the department in Dundee Council for parks and cemeteries and things like that. They had a very, very good exchange going for a time.
Yeah,
and I think there should be well, I'm quite sure you'll get publicity for the 75th anniversary. It is, after all, the longest twinning between a Scottish town and a French town.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's an older one between, I think it's Halifax and Pont du Nord, which happened in 1915. And it is the oldest. And Dundee in 1946 with Orléans that's the oldest Scottish twinning. Because Edinburgh, as I say, went with Caen. But the minute the war was over, that was it. That was finished, because the Edinburgh councillors preferred little trips to Nice, which became the twinning, the Edinburgh's twinning. And when I heard that, I had very facetious thoughts. I thought, yes, the climate.
I can understand, Evelyn. I can understand. I think publicity is very important of the 75th. We must get as much coverage in social media as well as the Courier and other avenues to make sure we can publicise. As you say, it's the oldest one in Scotland, so we really want to publicise it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah,
I agree.
But it's not. We publicise it and we get people to come, and maybe we'll have an exhibition. And then what happens? Because you've got to somehow keep these things going. And it's the fact that there is no equivalent organisation.
This is it. This is
communicate. But we are trying to make a few personal links.
Yes.
We had the students from Orléans University last year, because they couldn't come this year because of the pandemic, and we made a link with their tutors.
Yeah. And
so one of them has joined in our conversation once or twice, and that so it's slow. And I have my friend that I met when we went on the 50th anniversary. I stayed with her, and I've kept in touch on and off. But recently, because of these talks and things, we've kept in touch more. Mm-hmm. And she joined in, and she helped out. She joined in with Erwin's talk on food, contributed very nicely, and so. If we can just build up a few more personal links like that, I think it might help.
Well, I think you're right, and I think also something that hasn't happened maybe too much in recent times, but all the way through the early days, there were really quite a lot of sporting twinnings, exchanges going on. There was rugby, there was amateur football, there was golf, and swimming. There used to be a very regular swimming exchange with a swimming club in Orléans and a Dundee swimming club. and that was in the days before the beautiful new swimming pool. They did a lot of exchanging, and certainly the rugby was quite strong for a while.
Yeah,
and I think these things.
I remember.
Yeah, these things. I think on a personal level, I think it's a good idea for people to, as you say, Sally, to have that kind of family to family exchange is excellent. And I feel very strongly about that some of our closest friends are actually people in Orléans that I've known since 1951. Yeah. And, if you can keep up that contact, I think that personal contact is very important. But I think the sporting thing, and not just sporting, we did have, just to remember, was it called the Dundee Embroiderers Circle? Was it
Embroiderers Guild? Was it not Embroiderers Guild?
I can't remember, Alistair. It's some years back, but they exchanged with tapestry makers, amateur tapestry makers in Orléans. They had a coming and going, an exchange of ideas and all sorts of things going on. That would have been about the time of the 50th anniversary that was happening. So I think maybe you should have make a conscious effort. For instance, I've never quite understood why we haven't succeeded in having an art exchange with Orléans.
We have tried.
I'm sure. Yes, I've tried too.
We tried.
But it's
well, actually, one of my things I thought we could have done for the 75th was an art competition amongst the schools here and there. Yeah. Of course, pandemic has kind of got paid to doing anything in schools, really. And
well, this is
it. They've got enough to think about without having extra things to do.
No. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, this pandemic has knocked a whole lot of things on the head, and it's a shame. But that shouldn't stop us planning, of what we're going to do when it's all over.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so all ideas, good ideas. It might be worthwhile if I end up being interviewed by this courier chap, I might just put in the idea, that people, the twinning depends on people's activities, and if you have got any bright ideas about how we get, how we have, how we can encourage exchanges, do let me know, or do let you know, do let the society know, the association know. But it is a problem that they don't have an association, and that's always been a problem.
We belong to the Scottish Society of Art History, and they have a chap who's the curator of the arts of the University of Dundee called Matthew Jarron.
Yeah.
And I picked myself because I forgot to tell him that I was doing this talk on Dundee, so I didn't invite him. But he's always sending all sorts of things, and he's very imaginative, very active. He's done walks through Dundee. We went over for the art in the town. He's
public art.
Street art.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry?
The street art, he calls it, doesn't it? All these wall art look like...
Yes, that's right, street art, yes.
Street art. Mm-hmm.
And he knows all the collections that they have, and if you want to exchange something with something equivalent over there, an idea.
Do you actually know him?
Yeah.
Yes, we know him well. Matthew, he spoke. We were trade the other day. He's a very able presenter, and the trouble is he gives about. He talks so fast. You have to be very, very articulate. Listen to him carefully. But he's a very knowledgeable man. You're quite right. Very interesting. He gives a great talk on the public art in Dundee, and I'm a Dundonian all the time. I've walked through Dundee many times, but you didn't realise just what we have when you look up in many cases. And he's very good. And maybe there's something between Dundee University and Orléans we could revive, because certainly that would be very good. We could do that. But Evelyn,
can I just bring in Angus, who's a visitor to us, because you had some connection with Dundee and schools and Orléans?
Oh, well, I worked in Dundee. I was Assistant Director of Education for some years, and I was responsible for the twinning.
All right.
the school twinning in the 70s, and it worked very well, I may say. It never occurred to me that it would decline. You know, it was very popular. I mean, I hardly needed to do anything; it just happened. I went over several times and met Mademoiselle Cafes and others, but no, it was thriving in the 70s. Yep.
When you're mentioning Hélène Cafes, Ms. Mackay, she's still very, very active in Paris, but she is very, very enthusiastic about musical exchanges, and that's something we haven't mentioned. There was for some time a very, very good relationship between the Sicilian choir and the Poulenc, the Chorale Poulenc in Orléans.
Yeah. They went and sang in the cathedral. Mary Quentin did that. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was one year that Dundee Choral Union were going to go out, and I can't remember what year that was, but they had to withdraw at the last minute. I don't know, there was some upset of some kind. And in fact, it was the Arbroath Choral Society that went to represent Dundee and had a huge success in the cathedral. The cathedral was packed with people, and it was really that was a very, very special exchange, that the music exchange. And I think we've had recitals from Orléans musicians, teachers in the conservatoire have come over and done. We had 2 recitals that I can think of in the chaplaincy at the university. And there are musical possibilities. I'm quite sure. Music's an international language.
Tina.
I was with Sally for the 50th anniversary in the Choral Union.
And Donald.
And Donald, yes.
Of course. And I mean, it was just a fantastic experience, a fantastic concert in the cathedral. And the last time they tried to arrange something similar, I cannot remember why it didn't go ahead, but we were terribly, terribly disappointed that it didn't happen. It wasn't lack of enthusiasm on our part. It was something administrative. I just can't remember what it was, but we were terribly disappointed.
Yeah, well, good luck. Keep going, because I'm quite sure once this awful business is over, that kind of exchange will still, it will be looked for.
Still possible, yeah. I agree.
When Dundee Choral Union and Dundee Symphony Orchestra, a good number of representatives from each went in 95, I think it was.
96,
yes. Alison couldn't go because she was chaperoning our daughter, who was doing her standard grades at the time. Right. But I was able to go, and we did a concert in the wonderful cathedral with the organ, and there were 2 works that were played. There was Berlioz, which of course the French absolutely loved, and the one that they didn't really like was Elgar, because they didn't understand it.
They didn't understand. No, it's just, I remember I was there.
I know you were. Yeah.
And did that not start off with the Vivaldi Gloria?
No.
We just did the 2 works.
It was just the 2 things. The Berlioz Te Deum, which is amazing.
Oh, it's a wonderful thing.
And Elgar Music Makers.
I remember that concert very well.
Did the juniors do the Vivaldi, maybe?
There was something, maybe. Elgar's Music Makers is difficult for anyone to understand, actually. So maybe it wasn't the best choice.
Even non-musical.
Well, Neil Mantle was just an Elgar fanatic. That's why we took that.
Yes, we did a lot of Elgar.
Yeah.
Right. Can I ask Erwin if he's got any thoughts about how he would like the twinning, because he's taken school parties to France for years and years, and 3 years ago, started going to Orléans, and twice they've been to Orléans, and then of course it got cancelled last year. And won't happen this year. So are there any thoughts about Orléans? Oh, you're muted. You have to unmute.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, we were getting the point where you might have been able to get the pupils into school for a half day until it all got cancelled. Just gradually building up the. Yeah, it's a long process.
We've got to keep pushing. Yeah, I agree.
Can I interrupt, Evelyn, at that point, just to say that there is actually in the mairie Olivier Ravoire, who he's responsible for public and overseas relations, and
he's passed on to somebody else. Actually,
has he?
I think
there was an Audrey somebody that. Well,
Celine something.
Celine is a new lady. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just because, as you say, this year and last year were cancelled. I don't know if I know Celine, but I know that Olivier, I mean, he was given that responsibility of the twin cities and twin towns. And he did, there was somebody there, but he was overloaded with other things. He couldn't devote himself entirely. And I think that's just one of the great sadnesses of losing Hélène Cafès. She wasn't really appreciated by the people in the town hall, but by Jove, she did keep the twinning absolutely going. I mean, she was, and I can't imagine anybody these days doing what Hélène did, such as getting up at 4 a.m. and going up to an airport to meet somebody from the Polish twin, or and if she couldn't find a hotel room or a family to take somebody, she just took them herself. And she is an amazing lady. She runs now a music festival at Pâté and at Saint-Pierre-et-Ville-à-Colombe, near where she lives. And she's set up, and of course it hasn't happened last year and it probably won't happen again this year, but she has an annual organ competition. I think, Sally, I've given you the information on this. And it's become a very much a focal point for organists all over France. And she organizes master classes run, for instance, I think 2 years ago, by the chief organist from the Madeleine in Paris. And she's such a persuasive person. She wouldn't let, and in fact, she'll be jolly annoyed that she's not able to find a cure for COVID, because it'll be very frustrating for her currently not to be able to. I've known Hélène since 1951. She was at the convent school that I spent a week or two in at that point, and she big blonde plaits, most amazing thick blonde hair, and we hadn't remembered that we'd met each other when we were young, until one day in the office of Madame Collin, who at that point was the deputy mayor in charge of twinning. She, Madame Collin asked me where I had learned my French, and I said, "Oh, in Orléans." And where had I been in Orléans? And I told her that for some weeks I'd been in this convent school. And she, all of a sudden, I was aware of Hélène looking at me very, very closely. And she said, "La Protestante," which had been my nickname. And then when I looked at her, I said, La Polonaise. And I think Madame Collin wondered what on earth that had got into the two of us, but we were around each other's necks like that. We'd known each other as children. And we hadn't recognized each other in our older age. But it was so funny. La protestante. So she still calls me that. I get telephone calls fairly regularly, and we have chats. There we are. And that's, I mean, I have had just the great good fortune of having still have friends from that era, and people that I keep in touch with, and who come and visit me when we can, and so on. And it's very enriching. I honestly think culturally and in every other way, twinning is an enriching thing, whether it's for a city or an individual. It is something that we should all foster.
Well done, Evelyn. Yes, well done, well said. Yeah, Dundee. Okay, Sally.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Has anybody got anything else they'd like to ask? Well, I'll just say thank you very, very much to Evelyn, and I hope that's enthused everybody to keep going a bit more. And we'll try
25 years, 100.
The next, yes, I was thinking, yes.
I'm sorry, Alistair, you're going to have to do without me.
I know.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I think it'll be a whole new room then.
Yes, we need a whole new generation brought in to keep this going. Yes. So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Evelyn, very, very much for an interesting talk and for interesting conversation afterwards.
Thank you, Sally, and good luck to you all.
Thank you. Very much. Very good.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Nice to see you, Evelyn. All the best to you. Lovely to see you again.
Thank you,
Donald. We'll be in touch.
And thank you, Sally.
Everyone, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And lovely to see Peter and Helen again.
Yeah.
Keep well.